Logan is a 2017 American superhero film that belongs to the X-Men film series, distributed by 20th Century Fox and based on characters created by Marvel Comics. The film was directed by James Mangold, who had previously helmed the Wolverine in 2013, making Logan the third and final chapter in what fans often refer to as the Wolverine trilogy. The screenplay was written by James Mangold along with Scott Frank and Michael Green, drawing heavy inspiration from the celebrated Old Man Logan comic book storyline penned by Mark Millar, which depicted an aging, broken version of the Wolverine character living out his final days in a world where mutants have been nearly wiped out. The film was produced primarily in the United States, with significant portions shot across New Mexico and Louisiana, giving the production a distinctly American, dusty, neo-Western visual identity rather than the glossy, futuristic tone typically associated with comic book blockbusters. Logan was released worldwide on March 3, 2017, and it stands as the 10th installment overall in the X-Men cinematic franchise. What set this film apart from nearly every other superhero movie released up to that point was its hard R rating, which allowed Mangold and his team to explore violence, language, and emotional darkness in a way mainstream comic book films almost never attempt. Hugh Jackman, who had portrayed Wolverine in numerous films since the original X-Men in 2000, used Logan as his definitive farewell to the character, delivering what many critics consider the finest performance of his career in this role. Alongside him, Sir Patrick Stewart returned as Professor Charles Xavier, and newcomer Daphne Keane made her breakout appearance as Laura, also known as X-23. The film was praised almost universally upon release for its raw emotional weight, its willingness to subvert typical superhero conventions, and its decision to treat its central characters not as invincible icons but as exhausted, mortal human beings nearing the end of their journey. Plot details. The story of Logan unfolds in the year 2029, in a near future where mutant kind has been driven to the edge of extinction. No new mutants have been born in roughly 25 years, and the X-Men as an organized force have effectively ceased to exist. Logan, once known as the fierce and nearly indestructible Wolverine, has aged dramatically because his mutant healing ability has begun to fail him. He now lives a quiet, broken existence near the Mexican border, working as a limousine driver in El Paso, Texas, and numbing his physical pain with alcohol. His body is slowly being poisoned from within by the very adamantium that was grafted onto his skeleton decades earlier, leaving him weaker, slower, and more vulnerable than audiences have ever seen him. Logan shares a hidden refuge with Charles Xavier, the once brilliant telepathic leader of the X-Men, who is now suffering from a degenerative neurological condition that causes his immensely powerful mind to spiral out of control, occasionally triggering catastrophic and lethal psychic episodes. Caliban, a mutant with tracking abilities, helps Logan look after Charles in this secluded hideout, administering medication that keeps Charles's mind sedated and stable. The fragile peace of this existence is shattered when a desperate woman named Gabriella approaches Logan and begs him to transport a young girl named Laura to a sanctuary called Eden, located near the Canadian border, where other escaped young mutants are rumored to be gathering safely. Laura, it turns out, is no ordinary child. She was created in a secretive facility run by a sinister biotech corporation called Transigen, which had been conducting experiments on children using genetic material harvested from Wolverine himself, essentially making Laura his biological successor, infused with his same regenerative healing factor and retractable claws. Before Logan can fully process the situation, Gabriella is murdered, and Logan finds himself thrust into protecting Laura whether he wants the responsibility or not. The main antagonist pursuing them is Donald Pierce, a cybernetically enhanced mercenary leading a private security force known as the Reavers, who has been hired by Transigen to recapture Laura and eliminate any witnesses. Behind Pierce stands Dr. Xander Rice, the cold and calculating scientist overseeing the Transigen program, whose father was killed by Logan years earlier during his escape from the Weapon X facility, giving Rice a deeply personal motivation for revenge layered on top of his corporate objectives. As Logan, Charles, and Laura set off on a dangerous road trip across the American heartland, the film slows down to focus on the fractured, reluctant family dynamic forming between the three of them. Charles, despite his deteriorating mind, sees in Laura a flicker of hope for the future of mutant kind, while Logan resists forming any emotional attachment, scarred by years of loss and disillusionment. Along the way they briefly find shelter with a kind farming family, the Munsons, offering a fleeting glimpse of the normal domestic life Logan has long been denied, before tragedy strikes again when the Reavers track them down, resulting in devastating losses. The film does not shy away from grief, and several characters the audience grows attached to are killed in genuinely shocking and emotionally brutal fashion, reinforcing the sense that no one in this story is safe simply because of who they are. Eventually, Logan and Laura discover the location of Eden and find a small group of young mutant children who escaped from the Transigen facility, all of them exhibiting unique powers, much like Laura. However, their sanctuary is soon located by Pierce's forces, and Transigen unleashes its ultimate weapon, a younger and more savage clone of Logan himself, created using his own Uniged genetic data and designed to be a perfect, ruthless killing machine without conscience. In the explosive final confrontation in the forest, Logan, now pushed far beyond his physical limits and poisoned by the adamantium in his own body, fights this younger version of himself in a desperate battle to protect Laura and the other children. He succeeds in destroying his clone using an adamantium bullet, the only kind of weapon capable of truly killing a healer like him, but the effort costs him his life. In the film's final, deeply moving moments, Laura and the surviving children bury Logan in a forest clearing, and as they prepare to cross into Canada toward safety, Laura turns Logan's cross-shaped grave marker on its side, transforming it into an X, a quiet but powerful tribute honoring him as the final member of the X-Men. The film closes on this note of mournful hope, suggesting that even though Logan's story has ended, the future he sacrificed himself for might still survive through the next generation of mutants. Cast: Hugh Jackman stars as Logan, also known as Wolverine, delivering what is widely regarded as his most acclaimed performance in the role he had played for nearly 2 decades by the time this film was released. Sir Patrick Stewart portrays Professor Charles Xavier, bringing tremendous emotional depth to a version of the character far removed from the composed, authoritative leader audiences had seen in earlier X-Men films. Daphne Keane, in her major film debut, plays Laura, also referred to as X-23, and her largely wordless, physically intense performance was singled out by critics as one of the most impressive breakout turns in recent superhero cinema. Boyd Holbrook plays Donald Pierce, the cybernetic armed mercenary leader of the Reavers who relentlessly pursues Logan and Laura throughout the film. Richard E. Grant portrays Dr. Xander Rice, the scientist overseeing the Transigen mutant experimentation program, and one of the story's central antagonists. Stephen Merchant plays Caliban, the tracker mutant who assists Logan in caring for Charles Xavier. Additional roles include Elizabeth Rodriguez as Gabriella, the woman who first brings Laura to Logan, Eric LaSalle and Elise Neal as Will and Catherine Munson, the farming couple who briefly sheltered the trio, and Quincy Faust as their son Nate. The film was directed by James Mangold, with the screenplay credited to Mangold, Scott Frank, and Michael Green, and it was produced by Hutch Parker, Simon Kinberg, and Lauren Schuler-Donner, with Stan Lee serving as an executive producer. The haunting and emotionally resonant musical score was composed by Marco Beltrami, while cinematography was handled by John Matheson, whose stark, sun-bleached visual style became one of the film's defining artistic signatures. Release date and trailer information. Logan held its world premiere at the Berlin International Film Festival on February 17, 2017, followed by a premiere in New York City on February 24, 2017, before going on to its wide theatrical release across the United States and most international markets on March 3, 2017. The film later arrived on digital platforms on May 16, 2017, with physical Blu-ray, DVD, and 4K editions following on May 23, 2017. A special black and white edition known as Logan Noir was also made available for home viewing, allowing fans to experience the film's gritty visual tone in a stripped-down, high-contrast format reminiscent of classic Western cinema. The marketing campaign for Logan was widely praised, particularly its trailers, which leaned heavily into a somber, melancholic tone rather than typical action movie excitement. The teaser and full trailers used haunting, stripped-down music choices to underscore the film's themes of mortality, loss, and legacy, and they were celebrated by multiple entertainment outlets as among the finest trailers of that year, with several critics noting that the marketing accurately signaled this would be a fundamentally different kind of superhero film. An international red band trailer was also released, featuring more graphic violence than the standard cut, further emphasizing the unapologetically mature direction Mangold had taken with the material. Logan went on to become both a critical and commercial success, earning widespread acclaim for its performances, screenplay, and willingness to break away from the conventions of the genre, with many critics and fans ranking it among the very best superhero films ever made. Its emotional ending, in particular, left a lasting impact on audiences and is frequently cited as one of the most powerful character send-offs in modern blockbuster filmmaking, cementing Logan's place as a defining moment not just for the X-Men franchise, but for the entire superhero genre as a whole. Complete story of Logan. The film opens in the year 2029, in a world that has grown tired and gray, where the heroic mutants who once captured the public imagination are now little more than a memory. Logan, the man once celebrated as Wolverine, is shown sleeping inside a limousine in a junkyard near El Paso, Texas, his body wrecked by age and exhaustion. He is abruptly woken by a group of low-level criminals attempting to strip the tires off his vehicle. What should be an easy confrontation for the once mighty Wolverine instead reveals just how far he has fallen. His claws, when they emerge, are stained, slow, and unreliable, and his healing factor, the variability that made him nearly immortal for decades, now works at a fraction of its former speed. He is beaten, stabbed, and bloodied in the fight, and it takes him visibly longer to recover than audiences have ever witnessed. He eventually overpowers the men, but the sequence sets the tone for the entire film immediately, establishing that this version of Logan is mortal, fragile, and worn down by time in a way no previous X-Men film had dared to show. Logan returns to his place of work, driving the limousine for paying clients while battling chronic pain that he dulls with alcohol and stolen prescription medication. He is saving money in secret, hoarding cash with the goal of eventually purchasing a boat called Sunseeker, a vessel he dreams of using to sail away from the world entirely with Charles Xavier, escaping the wreckage of their lives. His real home is a hidden, collapsed underground bunker structure near the Mexican border, shared with Caliban, a mutant with the ability to track other mutants, who looks after the day-to-day needs of their shared companion, Professor Charles Xavier. Charles, once the brilliant and composed leader of the X-Men, is now elderly and suffering from a degenerative brain disease that causes his telepathic powers to spiral dangerously out of control. When his episodes occur, his immense psychic abilities can paralyze or even kill anyone nearby, which is why Logan and Caliban keep him sedated with experimental medication and isolated from the world. Charles speaks frequently of a tragic, unspecified event referred to only as Westchester, hinting at some past psychic catastrophe involving the deaths of the X-Men, though the film deliberately never explains the full details, leaving it as a haunting, unresolved wound in Charles's fractured memory. The fragile routine of their hidden existence is disrupted when a woman named Gabriella, a nurse who had been working at a mysterious facility, tracks Logan down and begs him for help. She reveals that she has been caring for genetically engineered children at a secret laboratory run by a biotech corporation called Transigen, operating under the cover of agricultural research. These children, it turns out, were created using preserved genetic material taken from old world mutants, essentially manufacturing a new generation of mutants in test tubes since natural mutant births had stopped entirely for unknown reasons. Among these children is a young girl named Laura, who Gabriella has smuggled out of the facility because she possesses abilities eerily similar to Logan's own, including a fast healing factor and retractable bone claws. Gabriella pleads with Logan to drive Laura north to a sanctuary known only through rumor and folklore as Eden, a supposed safe haven for escaped young mutants near the Canadian border, said to be inspired by old X-Men comic books that Laura herself has been reading and using almost as a treasure map. Logan, skeptical and emotionally closed off, initially refuses, accepting a large sum of money from Gabriella simply to keep quiet and stay out of it, intending to use the cash toward his boat. That same night, Logan returns to his trailer to find Gabriella has been murdered, and he is confronted by Donald Pierce, a cybernetically armed mercenary leading a private security force called the Reavers, who has been hired by Transigen to recover the missing child. Pierce questions Logan aggressively, but Logan denies any knowledge of Laura's whereabouts, even as Laura herself remains hidden nearby, having secretly followed Logan back to his home. After Pierce and his men leave, Logan discovers Laura hiding inside his vehicle, and despite his reluctance, he and Caliban realize they cannot simply abandon her, especially once Charles, sensing her unique mind, becomes fascinated and protective of the girl. Charles insists that they help her reach safety, seeing in her a flicker of the future he has lost faith in. Reluctantly, Logan agrees to drive Laura north, setting the stage for the film's central road trip narrative. Before they can leave, the Reavers attack the hideout in force, and in the resulting chaos Caliban sacrifices himself to delay their pursuers, allowing Logan, Charles, and Laura to escape across the border into the United States. During the escape, the trio witnesses Laura using her own claws and brutal fighting skills for the first time, revealing to a stunned Logan that she is far more than an ordinary child, and quite possibly a biological successor created using his own genetic material, making her something like an unintended daughter to him. As they continue their journey, the film slows its pace considerably, focusing on small, human moments between the three travelers. Logan attempts to keep emotional distance from Laura, frustrated by the responsibility forced upon him, while Charles, despite his failing mind, bonds with her gently, encouraging Logan to embrace the family-like connection forming between them whether he wants it or not. Their journey takes them through small towns and along anonymous highways, with several tense encounters along the way, including a stop at a casino hotel where Logan tries to gather identification documents and cash from a contact, only for the Reavers to track them down once again, resulting in a brutal hotel room battle. During this sequence, Charles experiences one of his dangerous psychic episodes, accidentally immobilizing several innocent bystanders in a nearby hotel hallway, a chilling reminder of how dangerous his condition has become even when his intentions remain good. Logan and Laura manage to fight off the attackers and flee once again, continuing north despite mounting injuries and exhaustion. Eventually, low on money and options, the group accepts a brief, kind offer of hospitality from a farming family named the Munsons, who allow them to rest and even help Logan repair his vehicle in exchange for assistance defending their land from a corporate water company attempting to seize it through intimidation. For a short while, the film allows its characters, and its audience, a rare moment of peace, as Logan, Charles, and Laura experience something resembling a quiet domestic life around the dinner table, hinting at the kind of stability all three of them have been denied for years. Charles in particular seems profoundly moved by this fleeting glimpse of normalcy, telling Logan that this is what life is supposed to look like, a home filled with people who care for one another. This peace is shattered violently that same night. The Reavers track the group to the farm, but more horrifyingly, they are accompanied by a separate, mysterious figure who appears to be a younger, more savage version of Logan himself. This figure, later revealed to be a manufactured clone of Logan referred to as X-24, was created by Transigen using Logan's own preserved genetic material from years earlier, before his healing factor began to fail, making him a perfect, remorseless killing machine without conscience, memory, or emotion, essentially Wolverine's full power without any of his humanity. In the ensuing massacre, X-24 brutally kills members of the Munson family, including the father who had shown them kindness, and most devastatingly, kills Charles Xavier himself, smothering the elderly professor in his bed while Logan is occupied fighting elsewhere on the property. Logan arrives too late to save him, and the loss of Charles marks one of the most emotionally devastating moments in the entire film, stripping away the one steady source of guidance and warmth Logan had left in his life. Grief-stricken and enraged, Logan and Laura are forced to flee once more, now utterly alone, pursued by both Pierce's mercenaries and the seemingly unstoppable X-24. Along their journey north, they receive unexpected aid from a stranger who turns out to be connected to the very sanctuary they have been seeking, confirming to Logan, much to his disbelief, that Eden is in fact a real place, not merely a fantasy lifted from old comic books. Following directions hidden within the pages of those comics, which Laura had been using almost like sacred scripture throughout the journey, the pair make their way into a dense forest near the Canadian border. There, they discover that Eden truly exists, hidden deep within the woods, home to a small group of other genetically engineered children who had escaped the same Transigen facility as Laura, each possessing their own unique mutant abilities. For a brief moment, it appears that Logan has succeeded in delivering Laura to safety, and the children prepare to cross the border into Canada to escape American jurisdiction entirely. However, Transigen's forces, led by the cold and calculating Dr. Xander Rice, the architect behind the entire mutant cloning program, soon locate the camp as well, intent on recapturing or eliminating every child rather than allowing the program's failures to become public knowledge. The final act of the film erupts into an intense, emotionally charged battle within the forest. Donald Pierce and his Reavers, along with the merciless X-24, descend upon the children's hiding place, forcing Logan, now critically weakened from his accumulated injuries and the ongoing poisoning effects of the adamantium fused to his skeleton years earlier, into one final, desperate fight. Despite his deteriorating body, Logan summons what remains of his strength to protect Laura and the other children, engaging in brutal combat with Pierce's men while Laura herself fights alongside him with ferocity matching, and at times exceeding, his own. The true climax arrives when Logan is forced into direct confrontation with X-24, his own younger, soulless duplicate, in a fight that visually and thematically represents Logan battling the legacy of violence he has carried his entire life. Severely wounded and nearly defeated, Logan is ultimately saved when Laura retrieves a rare adamantium bullet, one of the very few weapons in existence capable of killing a healer permanently. The same type of bullet Logan had once contemplated using on himself in earlier, darker moments of despair. Using this bullet, Logan manages to kill X-24, ending the threat once and for all, but the immense physical toll of the battle, combined with his already failing body, proves fatal. In the film's final, quietly devastating sequence, Logan succumbs to his wounds beneath a tree in the forest clearing, with Laura at his side. As he dies, Laura, who throughout the entire film had remained almost entirely silent, finally speaks to him directly, calling him Daddy, a single, heartbreaking word that crystallizes the unintended yet deeply real father-daughter bond that had grown between them over the course of their journey. The surviving children, now safe from Transigen's pursuit, gather to bury Logan in the forest, marking his grave with a simple wooden cross fashioned from fallen branches. As the children prepare to finally cross into Canada toward freedom, Laura lingers behind for a moment, walks back to Logan's grave, and gently turns the cross onto its side, transforming the shape into an X, a quiet, powerful, and deeply symbolic gesture honoring Logan not just as her protector, but as the final true member of the X-Men. The film closes on this somber yet hopeful image, suggesting that although Logan's long, painful story has finally ended, the future he gave his life to protect may yet continue through the next generation he helped set free. Actors' life histories. Hugh Jackman. Hugh Michael Jackman, who carries the weight of Logan on his shoulders both physically and emotionally, was born on October 12, 1968, in Sydney, Australia, the youngest of 5 children born to English-born parents, Christopher John Jackman, a Cambridge-educated accountant, and Grace Watson. When Jackman was only 8 years old, his parents separated, and his mother moved back to England, taking 2 of his sisters with her, while he remained in Australia to be raised by his father along with his other siblings. This early separation left a lasting impression on him, and by his own admission his relationship with his mother never fully healed in the years that followed. As a boy, Jackman attended Pymble Public School before moving on to the all-boys Knox Grammar School on Sydney's North Shore, where he was famously nicknamed Worm, due to his gangly frame, despite also being an outgoing extrovert and a capable rugby player. Acting was not his original ambition. He enrolled at the University of Technology Sydney to study journalism, earning a degree in communications, but found that his heart was not in that path. Acting had only entered his life as a compulsory subject during his studies, and it sparked something in him that journalism never had. He left his journalism studies behind to join a 1-year acting program at the Actors Centre in Sydney, and from there went on to train formally at the Western Australian Academy of Performing Arts in Perth, graduating in 1994. Even before he finished his training, Jackman had already turned down a role on the popular Australian soap opera Neighbours, a show that had launched the careers of stars like Russell Crowe and Kylie Minogue. Instead, his first major break came almost immediately after graduation, when he was cast in the Australian television prison drama Corelli in 1995. It was on the set of this very show that he met his future wife, actress Deborah Lee Furness, and the two married in April 1996. Jackman went on to build a strong reputation in Australian musical theatre throughout the mid-1990s, playing Gaston in a Melbourne production of Beauty and the Beast and Joe Gillis in Sunset Boulevard, before earning international recognition for playing Curly in the Royal National Theatre's acclaimed London production of Oklahoma. In 1998, a performance that earned him an Olivier Award nomination and put him firmly on the radar of casting directors outside Australia. His path to becoming Wolverine was something of a happy accident. The role had originally been cast with actor Dougray Scott, but when Scott became unavailable due to scheduling conflicts on the set of Mission Impossible 2, the production needed a replacement on short notice. Jackman's friend and fellow Australian actor Russell Crowe, who had himself been approached for the role first, recommended Jackman to director Bryan Singer instead. Jackman has often joked that he held something of a record for the longest audition process in history, having first read for the part nearly 10 months before he was finally offered it. The gamble paid off spectacularly when X-Men was released in the summer of 2000 and became a massive worldwide hit, transforming Jackman almost overnight from a relatively unknown Australian stage performer into a global movie star. He would go on to play the character of Wolverine across nearly 2 decades and multiple films, cementing his place as one of the most recognizable superhero actors of his generation. Beyond his action work, Jackman built one of the most versatile careers in modern Hollywood, balancing his physically demanding superhero role with acclaimed dramatic and musical performances. He won a Tony Award in 2004 for his Broadway portrayal of Australian singer-songwriter Peter Allen in The Boy from Oz, hosted the Tony Awards ceremony multiple times, and later earned widespread praise and a Golden Globe Award for his lead role in the film adaptation of the musical Les Miserables in 2012. His other major films span genres widely, including the romantic comedy Kate and Leopold, the gothic action film Van Helsing, Christopher Nolan's The Prestige, and the musical drama The Greatest Showman. By the time he stepped into the role of an aged, dying Logan for this particular film, Jackman had already spoken publicly about wanting this version of the character to serve as his definitive farewell to the role, and critics widely agree that the performance he delivered here stands as the most emotionally raw and acclaimed of his entire career playing the character. Jackman and Furness adopted 2 children together, a son named Oscar Maximilian born in 2000 and a daughter named Ava Elliott born in 2005, and remained married for 27 years before announcing their separation in 2023. Patrick Stewart. Sir Patrick Stewart, who brings such heartbreaking fragility to the role of an aging Charles Xavier in this film, was born on July 13, 1940, in the small town of Murfield in West Yorkshire, England. His upbringing was a difficult and working-class one. His mother, Gladys, worked as a weaver in the local textile mills, while his father, Alfred, had served as a regimental sergeant major in the British Army's Parachute Regiment. When Alfred's military career ended, he returned home struggling to adjust to civilian life as an unskilled laborer, and he became a violent alcoholic, subjecting young Patrick and his mother to ongoing domestic abuse. Stewart has spoken candidly in later interviews about the deep psychological impact of growing up in that household, describing how he and his mother would sometimes hide from bill collectors at the door, and how he absorbed a lasting sense of fear and caution from those experiences. Acting became his escape from that environment. He joined local drama groups starting at around age 12, and by 15 he had already left school to work briefly as a junior reporter for a local newspaper, a job he was eventually let go from for spending too much time at the theater. He spent roughly a year working as a furniture salesman simply to save enough money to attend drama school, and in 1957 he was accepted into the prestigious Bristol Old Vic Theatre School. Stewart's professional acting career began in 1959 in repertory theatre in Lincoln, followed by stints at the Manchester Library Theatre and a world tour with the Old Vic Company. In 1966, he joined the Royal Shakespeare Company, beginning an association with classical English theatre that would last for the next 27 years and shape his identity as an actor far more than any of his later screen fame ever would. He made his Broadway debut in 1971 in a production of A Midsummer Night's Dream, and throughout the 1970s and into the 1980s he continued building a reputation as a serious and highly respected Shakespearean stage actor, even as he began taking occasional supporting film and television roles, including a notable part in the BBC's I, Claudius and a supporting role as Gurney Halleck in David Lynch's 1984 adaptation of Dune. Everything changed in 1987, when Stewart was offered the leading role of Captain Jean-Luc Picard in a new television revival of Star Trek, titled Star Trek: The Next Generation. At the time, Stewart knew almost nothing about the cultural significance of the original Star Trek series and was deeply reluctant to commit to the standard 6-year television contract, believing, along with his agent and close friend Ian McKellen, who actively advised him against taking it, that the show would likely fail quickly and allow him to return to his beloved London stage career. Instead, the series became a massive global phenomenon, running successfully for 7 seasons from 1987 to 1994 and spawning 4 feature films, transforming Stewart into an internationally recognized star and bringing him a level of financial security he had never previously known. Despite this fame, Stewart has admitted that the all-consuming nature of the role made him fearful at times that his identity had become permanently tied to a single character, and he has spoken about how difficult it was to return to stage work after such a long absence. In the late 1990s, Stewart was cast as Professor Charles Xavier in the X-Men film series, a role that in many ways mirrored the calm, authoritative, mentor-like persona he had cultivated as Picard. The role reunited him on screen with his real-life close friend Ian McKellen, who played Xavier's adversary and old friend, Magneto, and the two actors' genuine off-screen friendship became one of the more beloved aspects of the franchise's promotional history. Stewart continued to balance blockbuster film work with serious stage performances throughout his career, earning acclaim for roles such as Macbeth, Claudius in Hamlet, and Vladimir in Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot. He was knighted by Queen Elizabeth II in 2010 for his services to drama. In terms of his personal life, Stewart was previously married to Sheila Falconer, with whom he has 2 children, and later to producer Wendy Noyce, before marrying singer and songwriter Sonny Ozell in 2013. For the role explored in this particular film, Stewart has spoken about drawing on his own childhood memories of fear and instability within a violent household to inform his portrayal of a once powerful man whose mind is now betraying him, lending the performance a deeply personal authenticity that many critics noted as one of the most moving aspects of the entire film. Daphne Keane. Daphne Keane, who delivers one of the most acclaimed child performances in modern superhero cinema as Laura, was born on January 4, 2005, in Madrid, Spain. She comes from a deeply artistic family. Her father, Will Keane, is an accomplished English stage and screen actor, while her mother, Maria Fernandez Ake, is a Spanish actress, theater director, and writer. Surrounded from birth by creative influences on both sides of her family, including a great-aunt who is a celebrated poet, Keane has described feeling like an artistic outsider among children her own age who were drawn to more conventional childhood activities, eventually finding her true comfort on theater stages and film sets rather than playgrounds. She made her acting debut at a young age in 2014, appearing alongside her own father in the television drama series The Refugees, in which she played a young girl named Anna, often known as Ani. Her path toward the role that would define her early career began when she auditioned for the part of Laura in James Mangold's film. The casting director responsible for finding the character reportedly endorsed Keane passionately, noting the unusual blend of innocence and vulnerability she projected even in audition footage, predicting correctly that audiences would fall deeply for the character once they saw her performance. To take on the role, Keane and her family relocated from Spain to the United States, and she found herself, while still only a young child, working alongside seasoned veterans like Hugh Jackman and Patrick Stewart, and under the direction of an experienced filmmaker like Mangold. Her performance, largely wordless for most of the film's runtime and built instead on raw physicality and ferocious intensity, was singled out by numerous film critics as one of the most striking breakout performances by a young actress in recent superhero film history, drawing comparisons in tone and presence to a young Natalie Portman. The role earned her the Empire Award for Best Newcomer along with nominations from several other critics' associations. Following her breakthrough, Keane went on to land the demanding lead role of Lyra Belacqua in the BBC and HBO fantasy series His Dark Materials, based on the beloved novel trilogy by Philip Pullman, a role she would play across 3 seasons from 2019 to 2022, working opposite major stars such as James McAvoy and Ruth Wilson. Notably, her real father, Will Keane, also appeared in the same series, playing an entirely different supporting character. She has spoken candidly in later interviews about effectively growing up on camera through this period of her life, noting with dry humor that she spent nearly a decade of her childhood and adolescence essentially portraying variations of a feral, emotionally guarded young girl with complicated father figures, a clear nod to both Laura and Lyra. Keane continued building her career into young adulthood with roles in the Disney Plus series Percy Jackson and the Olympians, the Star Wars spin-off series The Acolyte, and a return to the role of Laura in 2024's Deadpool and Wolverine, allowing her to reunite once more with Hugh Jackman years after their original film together. Boyd Holbrook. Boyd Holbrook, who portrays the ruthless mercenary leader Donald Pierce, was born Robert Boyd Holbrook on September 1, 1981, in the small town of Prestonsburg, located in the Appalachian coal country of eastern Kentucky. He was raised primarily in nearby Harlan County, the son of a coal miner father and a mother who worked in real estate. Growing up in a rural Appalachian community with limited access to arts programs, Holbrook initially had no exposure to acting or theater as realistic career paths. His own high school did not even maintain a functioning drama or art program. As a teenager, he gravitated toward basketball, hoping it might offer him a path toward a scholarship and a way out of his hometown, though he later admitted with self-deprecating humor that he simply was not tall enough or athletic enough to make that dream a reality. After graduating high school, he took on physically demanding jobs, including working overnight shifts unloading planes for United Parcel Service in Louisville as part of an employer-sponsored tuition program, an exhausting schedule that left him, in his own words, feeling like a zombie after only 2 semesters. His unlikely path into the entertainment industry began while he was working part-time as a carpenter at the Jenny Wiley Theater in Kentucky, helping maintain the physical stage and sets. A modeling agent who happened to be visiting the theater noticed him, and was struck by his look, leading him to sign with Elite Model Management in 2001. This launched a successful modeling career that took him around the world, walking runways and appearing in campaigns for major fashion houses including Dior, Gucci, Calvin Klein, Versace, and Jean-Paul Gaultier, among many others. Using the income from his modeling work, Holbrook eventually moved to New York City and enrolled in serious acting training, studying the Meisner technique at the William Esper Studio and taking additional coursework in filmmaking at New York University. His break into film acting came when he personally submitted a screenplay to acclaimed director Gus Van Sant, who was impressed enough by Holbrook's talent and persistence to cast him in a role in his biographical drama Milk in 2008. From there, Holbrook steadily built a respected filmography of supporting roles in acclaimed and high-profile productions throughout the early 2010s, including Out of the Furnace, The Skeleton Twins, A Walk Among the Tombstones, and David Fincher's Gone Girl. His true breakthrough into mainstream recognition, however, came through television, when he was cast as real-life DEA agent Steve Murphy in the Netflix crime drama series Narcos, a role that introduced him to a massive global streaming audience. It was around this period of rising visibility that he was cast as the chief antagonist in this particular film, working for the first time with director James Mangold, a creative partnership that would later continue when Mangold cast him again years later in Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, where Holbrook has spoken about the valuable lessons in screen presence and timing he picked up from working alongside veteran star Harrison Ford. In his personal life, Holbrook was previously engaged to actress Elizabeth Olsen before the relationship ended in 2015, and he later married Danish artist Tatiana Pajkovic in 2018, with the couple going on to have 2 children together. Richard E. Grant. Richard E. Grant, who plays the chillingly composed scientist Dr. Xander Rice, was born Richard Grant Esterhuizen on May 5, 1957, in Mbabane, the capital of the British Protectorate of Swaziland, now known as Eswatini, in southern Africa. His father, Henrik Esterhuizen, held the significant position of Minister of Education for the Swazi government, while his mother, Leon, came from a similarly prominent background. Grant's childhood took an unsettling turn when he was 9 years old and witnessed his parents' marriage collapse, with his mother leaving the family to start a new life with another man, an event Grant has described as more bewildering than embittering at the time. The breakup caused significant local scandal given his father's prominent public position, and Grant was raised primarily by his father afterward, attending St. Mark's School in Mbabane before moving on to the respected Waterford Kamloops United World College of Southern Africa for his secondary education. He has spoken openly in later interviews about growing up around his father's struggles with alcoholism, an experience made stranger by the fact that Grant himself discovered early in life that he has a rare physical intolerance to alcohol, lacking the necessary enzyme to process it properly. Grant studied English and drama at the University of Cape Town beginning in 1976, where he co-founded an experimental, multiracial theater ensemble called the Troop Theater Company during a politically tense era in Southern African history. Following his father's death from lung cancer in 1981, Grant made the decision to leave Africa behind and relocate to London in 1982. Arriving with little more than a couple of suitcases and a determination to build an acting career, despite his family's understandable worry given the impracticality of pursuing professional acting in the environment he had grown up in. He spent his early years in London working odd jobs, including a stint as a waiter, while slowly building stage acting credits. It was his now wife, dialect coach Joan Washington, whom he married in 1986, who encouraged him to pursue an audition for a low-budget British film about a perpetually drunk, failing actor. That film was With Nail and I, released in 1987, and Grant's lead performance in the title role became an instant cult classic, launching his entire screen career almost overnight despite the irony that he had to be coached through an entire night of drinking champagne and vodka by the director simply so that he would have some physical memory of intoxication to draw upon for the part, given his genuine inability to tolerate alcohol himself. From there, Grant built one of the more eclectic character actor careers in modern cinema, working with major directors including Robert Altman, Francis Ford Coppola, and Martin Scorsese, and appearing in films ranging from Bram Stoker's Dracula to Spice World to Gosford Park. He also wrote and directed a film called Wah Wah in 2005, a loosely autobiographical drama drawing directly from his own childhood in Swaziland. Years after his role in this particular superhero film, Grant would go on to earn his first Academy Award nomination for his supporting performance in Can You Ever Forgive Me? In 2018. Grant's wife, Joan Washington, with whom he shared one daughter, passed away from lung cancer in 2021 after a long and devoted marriage. Stephen Merchant. Stephen Merchant, who brings a quiet warmth to the role of the tracker mutant Caliban, was born on November 24, 1974, in Bristol, England, to his father, Ron, a plumber, and his mother, Elaine. He has a younger sister named Alex, who would later go on to work as an art director on one of his most famous projects. As a child, Merchant was notably shy, bookish, and more inclined towards schoolwork than sports, and he has joked about going through an awkward teenage phase that included wearing bow ties for 6 months straight. Standing at an imposing 6 feet 7 inches tall even as a teenager, Merchant has remarked that he eventually decided that if people were going to be staring up at him regardless, he might as well give them a reason to by pursuing performance. He participated in school theatrical productions and began working as a mobile disc jockey at the age of 16, before going on to study film and literature at the University of Warwick, where he also hosted his own comedy and music radio program that built a notable local following among students. After graduating from university in 1996, Merchant returned to his hometown of Bristol and began performing stand-up comedy, eventually winning recognition through the Daily Telegraph Open Mic Award. In 1997, seeking steadier work, he applied for and was hired as an assistant to the head of speech at the London radio station XFM, a position held at the time by a then relatively unknown comedian named Ricky Gervais. The two quickly formed an unlikely creative partnership, going on to co-host a weekly radio program together. After both left XFM in 1998 following a corporate buyout, Merchant enrolled in a production training course at the BBC, and for one of his coursework assignments he created a short film starring Gervais that would eventually evolve into the concept for what became The Office, the workplace mockumentary sitcom that Merchant co-wrote and co-directed starting in 2001. Though the show began with modest ratings in the United Kingdom, it eventually became one of the most influential and successful British comedy series of its era, later adapted into a hugely popular American version. Following the success of The Office, Merchant and Gervais continued their close creative partnership on further acclaimed projects, including the television series Extras, in which Merchant also performed on screen as a hapless talent agent, and the series Life's Too Short. The pair also achieved significant success in podcasting, with The Ricky Gervais Show becoming, at one point, the most downloaded podcast in the world according to Guinness World Records, largely thanks to the unintentional comedic appeal of their radio producer, Carl Pilkington. Merchant's acting career outside of his direct collaborations with Gervais expanded steadily over the years, including supporting film roles in projects like Hot Fuzz and Run, Fat Boy, Run, voice acting work as the robot character Wheatley in the popular video game Portal 2, and eventually his quietly affecting supporting role in this particular superhero film. Following this period, Merchant went on to write and direct the acclaimed sports drama Fighting with My Family in 2019 and later created, co-wrote, and starred in the television series The Outlaw. Budget and making of Logan. Logan was produced on a relatively modest budget for a major superhero film, coming in at around $97 million, a figure considerably lower than most comparable comic book tentpoles of its era. 20th Century Fox deliberately kept the production lean rather than treating it like a typical bloated blockbuster, since director James Mangold's entire creative vision for the film depended on stripping away the usual glossy, oversized spectacle associated with the superhero genre. Instead of building elaborate city-destroying set pieces or relying heavily on digital effects to create sprawling action sequences, the production invested its money into practical locations, grounded production design, and the kind of dusty, sunburned, real-world cinematography that gave the film its distinctive neo-Western texture. This approach paid off remarkably well at the box office. Despite carrying a hard R rating, which typically limits a comic book film's audience and revenue potential, Logan opened to a massive $85 million domestic weekend, ultimately going on to earn over $226 million within the United States and Canada alone, and a total worldwide gross of roughly $619 million. This meant the film earned back more than 6 times its original production budget, making it both a critical triumph and a hugely profitable success for the studio, proving decisively that audiences were hungry for more mature, character-driven superhero storytelling. During the development phase of the production, the filmmakers took an unusual step to protect the project from premature leaks and overzealous fan speculation. Before filming began in earnest, the production was given a deliberately misleading working title, Juarez, specifically to throw off media attention and lower the public visibility of the shoot, while crews scouted locations and prepared sets. This ruse worked for a time, though local media in the filming areas eventually uncovered the deception once production activity became too noticeable to hide. Principal photography ultimately took place primarily across New Mexico and Louisiana, including extensive work in and around New Orleans, with the arid, sun-bleached landscapes of the American Southwest standing in beautifully for the film's near-future, decaying version of the United States and Mexico border region. The musical score also went through a notable change during production. Composer Cliff Martinez was originally announced to score the film, but later in the production process, Mangold made the decision to bring in Marco Beltrami instead, a composer with whom he had already built a strong creative relationship through earlier collaborations on films like 3:10 to Yuma and The Wolverine, and Beltrami's haunting, mournful score ultimately became one of the film's most praised technical elements. One of the most significant behind-the-scenes decisions involved Hugh Jackman's physical transformation for the role. Rather than relying purely on makeup and visual effects to portray a Wolverine whose healing factor was failing and whose body was aging and deteriorating, Jackman insisted on achieving much of that worn-down, gaunt appearance through real physical methods. For scenes requiring him to appear shirtless and visibly depleted, Jackman would deliberately dehydrate his body for a full 48 hours beforehand, a dangerous technique used to shed water weight and achieve an extremely lean, veined, exhausted look on camera. Jackman had actually used this same risky technique years earlier to portray the starving prisoner Jean Valjean in the film adaptation of Les Miserables, and he has publicly stated in interviews that nobody should ever attempt this kind of extreme dehydration without proper medical supervision, given how genuinely dangerous it can be to the body. Jackman has also gone on record saying that this particular film demanded more intense physical training and preparation than any other Wolverine movie he had made across his 17 years in the role, a notable statement considering how physically demanding the earlier films in the franchise had already been. Funny and light-hearted moments from the set. Despite the film's overwhelmingly dark and emotionally heavy subject matter, the actual atmosphere on set was reportedly filled with warmth, playfulness, and a surprising amount of humor, much of it generated by the film's youngest star. Daphne Keane, who was only around 11 years old during filming, quickly became something of a legend among the cast and crew, not for being intimidated by her older, more experienced co-stars, but for the opposite reason entirely. During her audition process, rather than simply performing the scripted material handed to her, young Keane actually asked Mangold and the casting team if she could improvise some of her dialogue and physical choices, a request virtually unheard of from a child actor auditioning for a major Hollywood blockbuster. Her audition tape opposite Hugh Jackman, which was later included as a special feature on the film's home video release, became something of a cult favorite among fans specifically because of how startlingly intense, profane, and fully committed the young actress was, fully embracing Laura's feral, animalistic mannerisms despite her tender age, much to the amusement and astonishment of everyone watching in the room. The casting director responsible for finding Keane had originally discovered her through a homemade audition tape filmed by her own father, actor Will Keane, at their family home in Madrid, which famously featured young Daphne climbing and scaling a massive bookcase in their living room to demonstrate her natural athleticism and fearlessness, an image that has since become something of a beloved piece of Logan production folklore. To help her connect with the feral, animalistic physicality the character required, Mangold sent Keane on an unusual research assignment, taking her to visit a zoo so she could observe and study animals in captivity, looking specifically for inspiration on how a wild, trapped creature might move and behave. Keane has spoken fondly in later interviews about watching a particular bear that was confined to a small enclosure during that visit, explaining that something about the animal's contained, simmering tension stuck with her and found its way into how she physically approached playing Laura. The dinner table sequence at the Munson family farm, one of the few warm and gentle moments in an otherwise brutal film, was reportedly a particularly enjoyable scene to shoot for the cast. According to Patrick Stewart, much of the dialogue in that scene was not actually scripted as written. After filming a few takes using the original written dialogue exactly as scripted, Mangold encouraged the actors to loosen up and improvise some of their lines, allowing Stewart, Jackman, and the supporting actors playing the Munson family to play around more naturally with the conversation, resulting in a scene that feels remarkably authentic and unforced precisely because much of what audiences hear in the finished film was invented spontaneously by the actors in the moment rather than delivered verbatim from a script page. Hugh Jackman, despite playing such a bitter, exhausted, and emotionally closed-off character on screen, was reportedly the exact opposite of Logan in terms of his actual demeanor on set, earning a reputation among the crew as endlessly patient, warm, and generous. Daphne Keane has specifically credited Jackman with personally teaching her how to properly treat a film crew with respect and kindness, recalling that he made a point of knowing the names of everyone working on set, regardless of their job title or position in the hierarchy, and that he would regularly buy lottery tickets for crew members on a weekly basis as a light-hearted gesture of appreciation and camaraderie. Keane has said she learned directly from watching Jackman that the usual distance often maintained between movie stars and the working crew around them is fundamentally the wrong way to approach a film set, a lesson she has said she carried forward into her own subsequent projects. Director James Mangold also reportedly gave young Keane a piece of acting advice during filming that she has continued to repeat fondly in interviews years later. According to Keane, Mangold told her to always commit fully and go completely over the top with her performance in any given take, on the logic that it is always far easier for a director to ask an actor to scale a performance back than it is to coax more genuine intensity out of someone who is holding back out of fear of overacting. This advice apparently became something of a guiding principle for the young actress throughout the production, and it visibly shows in the raw, unrestrained physicality of her final performance. Adding a touch of irony to the film's casting history, before Daphne Keane ultimately won the role of Laura, Stranger Things star Millie Bobby Brown had actually auditioned for the part, and even completed a screen test opposite Hugh Jackman himself. A fascinating bit of alternate casting trivia that fans only learned about well after the film's release. Additionally, in a fun bit of franchise trivia involving an actor who did not end up appearing in the finished film, Liev Schreiber, who had previously played the villain Sabretooth in an earlier Wolverine film, was actually offered the opportunity to briefly reprise that role for a planned scene in Logan, in which Logan would have reluctantly sought out his old enemy for help while passing through Oklahoma City. Scheduling conflicts tied to Schreiber's commitment to filming the television series Ray Donovan ultimately prevented this reunion from happening, leading to the scene being scrapped entirely before it ever made it in front of cameras. Finally, in one of the more emotionally complicated yet quietly remarkable moments of the production, cinematographer John Matheson made the unusual decision to break from director Mangold's typically preferred single-camera shooting method specifically for Logan's climactic death scene with Laura. Recognizing how emotionally raw and exhausting the scene would be for both Jackman and young Keane, Matheson insisted on using two cameras simultaneously to capture both actors' performances at once, reasoning that asking either of them to repeatedly recreate such a devastating emotional moment across multiple separate takes would be unnecessarily cruel, and would likely produce a weaker, more mechanical result. This decision meant the genuine tears audiences see from Daphne Keane during that pivotal scene were entirely real, captured in the moment rather than performed repeatedly for the camera, and crew members on set have since described the atmosphere during the filming of that particular sequence as deeply quiet and respectful, with the entire crew visibly moved by what they were witnessing unfold in front of them. Cultural and historical details of Logan. Logan stands apart from nearly every other superhero film released before or since because director James Mangold deliberately chose not to look toward other comic book movies for inspiration. Instead, he built the entire structure, tone, and emotional language of the film around classic American cinema, particularly the Western genre, fusing it with elements of road movies and neo-noir filmmaking to create something that critics and scholars have since classified as a neo-Western, a modern film set in a contemporary or near-future world that nonetheless carries all the thematic weight, visual grammar, and mythic structure of a traditional Western. Mangold himself has spoken at length about the specific films he drew from while shaping Logan, citing direct visual and tonal influence from George Stevens's 1953 classic Shane, the 1972 film The Cowboys, Peter Bogdanovich's Paper Moon from 1973, the 1977 Clint Eastwood vehicle The Gauntlet, Clint Eastwood's own later masterpiece Unforgiven from 1992, the family drama Little Miss Sunshine, and the emotionally raw character study The Wrestler. This eclectic mix of influences explains why Logan feels so fundamentally different in texture from typical superhero fare, favoring sun-bleached, dusty, naturalistic cinematography over the glossy, color-saturated visual style audiences had come to expect from the genre. The most significant and explicitly acknowledged influence on the film is Shane, a revered 1953 Western starring Alan Ladd as a weary, reformed gunfighter who is pulled back into violence one final time to protect a family of settlers from a ruthless cattle baron and his hired gun. The thematic parallels between Shane and Logan are deliberate, and woven directly into the film itself, rather than left as a subtle homage for film scholars to uncover. At one point in the story, Charles Xavier and young Laura are shown watching Shane together on a hotel television set, with Charles reflecting wistfully on having seen the film decades earlier, a quiet moment that foreshadows everything still to come in the story. Most powerfully, the film's devastating final scene, in which Laura delivers a eulogy over Logan's grave, directly echoes both the famous funeral scene from Shane, where a peaceful homesteader is buried after being murdered by the film's villain, and the closing dialogue of Shane itself, in which the title character tells the young boy that there are no more guns needed in the valley. A poetic sentiment about violence men carry that they ultimately cannot escape from. Mangold takes this exact theme, originally used to describe the quiet tragedy of the American frontier gunslinger, and repurposes it to describe the legacy of a superhero who has spent his entire existence as a weapon, suggesting that Logan's story is really the story of the Western gunfighter translated into modern mythology. Beyond Shane, the film also draws heavily from Paper Moon, the 1973 road movie starring real-life father and daughter Ryan and Tatum O'Neal as a con man and a young girl who may or may not actually be his biological daughter, journeying together across Depression-era America and slowly forming an authentic bond despite an uncertain and complicated relationship. This structure maps almost exactly onto the relationship between Logan and Laura, two characters thrown together by circumstance and biology rather than choice, who reluctantly grow into something resembling a real family over the course of their shared journey. Mangold has also acknowledged a clear creative debt to Unforgiven, Clint Eastwood's bleak meditation on an aging former killer trying and failing to leave his violent reputation behind him, a film that similarly explores how the past inevitably catches up with men who believe they have outrun it. Film scholars have additionally pointed out structural and thematic similarities to Cormac McCarthy's body of work and to the dusty, lawless wasteland aesthetic of George Miller's Mad Max films, both of which share Logan's vision of a crumbling, sun-scorched America where institutions have failed and survival depends on the strength of small, makeshift families formed along the road. In terms of its direct comic book source material, Logan draws its core narrative concept from Old Man Logan, an acclaimed and notably bleak Wolverine storyline written by Mark Millar with artwork by Steve McNiven, originally published in 2008. The comic depicted an alternate future version of Wolverine living decades after supervillains had successfully conquered the United States, a broken man who had sworn off violence entirely after being manipulated into killing his fellow X-Men, only to be drawn back into one final journey across a devastated American landscape. While the film does not adapt the comic's specific plot points, which involve a vastly different and far more fantastical cast of characters including a blind Hawkeye and a monstrous, inbred clan descended from the Hulk, it borrows the comic's central emotional premise of an aged, weary Wolverine who has lost faith in heroism and is forced into one last act of violence to protect someone he loves. Notably, Hugh Jackman had publicly referenced this comic by name as early as a 2015 Comic-Con appearance, building years of fan anticipation that this storyline would eventually make it to the screen in some form. The film's release also has to be understood within the broader industry context of 2016 and 2017. A period when the success of the R-rated superhero film Deadpool, also released by 20th Century Fox and loosely connected to the X-Men franchise, fundamentally changed studio thinking about what comic book movies could be. Deadpool's massive box office success on a relatively modest budget proved decisively that a harder rating did not necessarily limit a superhero film's commercial potential, giving Fox the confidence to commit fully to making Logan an R-rated film from the outset rather than softening it for a broader PG-13 audience. A decision both Jackman and producer Simon Kinberg have stated was always the plan given how dark and violent the underlying story demanded to be told. Thematically, Logan engages with a number of ideas that resonated strongly with audiences and critics in ways that extended beyond typical superhero entertainment. The film's near-future setting, depicting a closed and heavily monitored border between the United States and Mexico, along with a final act centered on a desperate flight towards sanctuary across the Canadian border, struck many viewers and critics as eerily prescient of real-world political conversations happening around immigration, border security, and asylum that were intensifying in American discourse around the time of the film's release, even though production had wrapped before those particular debates reached their later intensity. Critics have noted this as a coincidental but powerful resonance rather than something the filmmakers intentionally set out to comment on directly. More central to the film's actual design is its unflinching meditation on aging, physical decline, and mortality, themes almost never explored with this level of honesty in a genre built around characters who are typically depicted as eternally youthful, invincible, and unchanging. by showing audiences a Wolverine whose healing powers are failing him and a Professor Xavier whose extraordinary mind is being destroyed by disease, Logan forces viewers to confront the reality that even mythic figures of immense power are not exempt from the universal human experience of growing old, losing control of one's own body and mind, and eventually dying. The film also continues a long tradition within X-Men storytelling of using mutants as a broader allegory for marginalized and persecuted groups, a thematic backbone that has existed within Marvel's mutant comics since their earliest publication in the 1960s, when mutant persecution was often read by fans and scholars as a stand-in for the civil rights struggles of that era. In Logan, this allegory takes on a darker and more clinical shape, with the children at the heart of the story having been created in a laboratory setting and treated as disposable biological products by a corporation interested only in their utility as weapons, raising pointed questions about exploitation, bodily autonomy, and the commodification of vulnerable lives by powerful institutions. Academic film analysis has also examined the movie's complicated relationship with masculinity, noting that while the film initially seems to critique traditional, paternalistic models of heroic manhood by showing Logan's violence as something corrosive and tragic rather than admirable, its emotional climax nonetheless revolves around a deeply sentimental, traditionally framed vision of fatherhood and self-sacrifice, creating an intentional ambivalence that scholars have argued mirrors the same tension found in its primary inspiration, Shane. Visually, Mangold has spoken about drawing influence not only from American westerns but also from the visual language of early 20th century German expressionist filmmaking, a movement known for its dramatic use of shadow, strong foreground staging, and deep visual composition, qualities Mangold felt shared a natural common ground with the way comic book panels themselves are traditionally composed and framed. This combination of Western mythology, classical Hollywood staging, and expressionist visual technique gives Logan a distinct cinematic identity that critics widely praised as feeling more like a serious work of American film art than a typical studio blockbuster, with multiple reviewers at the time of release favorably comparing its emotional and artistic ambitions to Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight, previously considered the high watermark for prestige superhero filmmaking. Ultimately, Logan's last ironic historical details of Logan. One of the most fascinating ironies surrounding Logan involves the villain that almost was. In the post-credits scene of the earlier film X-Men, Apocalypse, director Bryan Singer included a sequence showing mysterious operatives working for a company called Essex Corporation collecting a vial of Wolverine's blood from the ruins of a secret facility. Comic book fans immediately recognized the name as a direct reference to Nathaniel Essex, better known as Mr. Sinister, a brilliant and villainous geneticist from the original X-Men comics who is obsessed with cloning and genetic manipulation. Singer himself confirmed at the time that this scene was specifically meant to set up Mr. Sinister as the central villain for what was then simply being called Wolverine 3. Fans spent years building anticipation around this connection, fully expecting Logan's primary antagonist to be this flamboyant, immortal, and visually theatrical comic book villain. Ironically, when James Mangold actually came aboard to write and direct the film, he made the deliberate decision to scrap this plan entirely, later explaining that a character as operatic, brightly costumed, and over the top as Mr. Sinister simply had no place in a film he was determined to ground in harsh, dusty realism rather than traditional comic book spectacle. The irony here runs in two directions at once. On one hand, an entire previous film had planted a very specific narrative seed that was ultimately never harvested, leaving the Essex Corporation reveal as something of a dead end within the franchise's continuity. On the other hand, the blood sample collected in that scene was retroactively confirmed by producer Simon Kinberg to still be loosely connected to Laura's creation, meaning the moment technically still mattered to the story, just not in the dramatic, villain-introducing way audiences had originally been led to expect. A second layer of historical irony involves the franchise's broader fate following Logan's massive critical and commercial success. At the very same time Mangold was steering this particular Wolverine story away from flashy comic book villainy and towards something more restrained and human, the X-Men film franchise as a whole was beginning to crumble under the weight of films like X-Men: Apocalypse, which had received a noticeably cooler critical reception and was widely viewed as a turning point that exposed creative fatigue within the franchise. Mr. Sinister, along with plans for him to eventually anchor entire future X-Men films, never made it to the screen, partly because Disney's acquisition of 20th Century Fox effectively absorbed and dissolved the X-Men franchise as it had existed, folding the characters instead into Marvel Studios' own separate cinematic universe. There is a striking irony in the fact that Logan, the film actively distancing itself from interconnected franchise storytelling and grand shared universe ambitions, ended up being remembered as one of the only truly satisfying conclusions to come out of an entire studio's collapsing superhero universe. While the films that tried harder to set up an expansive shared future largely failed to deliver on those promises at all. Another deeply ironic historical detail concerns the film's central narrative engine itself, the very thing that once made Wolverine seem unstoppable. For nearly 2 decades across multiple films, Wolverine's adamantium-coated skeleton was presented to audiences as the ultimate symbol of his invincibility, a permanent, indestructible upgrade bonded directly to his bones that made him one of the most physically dominant characters in the entire Marvel mythology. Logan inverts this completely, revealing that the very same metal that once made him essentially unkillable has, over the decades, been slowly poisoning him from the inside, interfering with his healing factor and literally causing his own body to fail. The thing that defined his power for his entire existence becomes, in this film, the quiet, invisible cause of his death. This kind of poetic reversal, where a character's greatest strength becomes the instrument of his own destruction, carries an almost classical, mythological irony, not unlike ancient stories of heroes destroyed by the very gifts or weapons that once made them legendary. There is also considerable irony embedded in the film's treatment of its main antagonist's creation, X-24, the younger, savage clone of Logan himself, manufactured using genetic material taken from Wolverine before his healing powers began to deteriorate. In effect, the film's true final villain is simply Logan in his physical prime, a version of the character with all of the old cinematic Wolverine's raw strength and ferocity, but completely devoid of conscience, memory, or humanity. For 17 years, the entire purpose of these films had been to showcase exactly that kind of unstoppable physical power as something heroic and admirable. Logan ultimately asks its audience to watch its own beloved hero do battle against a flawless, younger, more powerful reflection of his own former self, suggesting that the very qualities fans had cheered for across nearly 2 decades of films, sheer strength, savagery, and seeming invincibility, are actually empty and even monstrous without the emotional growth, regret, and love that the aged, weakened version of the character has since gained. The decision to set Logan in the specific year 2029 also carries its own quiet irony. Mangold has explained that this particular date was chosen deliberately to sidestep any direct conflict with the altered timeline established by the earlier film X-Men: Days of Future Past, which had effectively reset much of the X-Men franchise's continuity. In other words, the film's creative team went out of their way to detach Logan from the franchise's increasingly tangled and convoluted timeline, even while the film itself remained, on paper, very much a part of that same shared universe. This created an unusual situation where Logan functioned almost as a standalone film hiding inside a larger franchise, intentionally written to work whether or not audiences had seen, understood, or even cared about the increasingly complicated continuity of the films that came before it, a quiet rebellion against the very franchise machinery that financed and released it. Perhaps one of the more bittersweet ironies involves Hugh Jackman's own public declarations at the time of the film's release. Jackman repeatedly and emphatically stated in interviews that Logan represented his absolute final performance as Wolverine, a definitive farewell after 17 years with the character, and this sentiment became a major part of the film's marketing and emotional framing, with audiences specifically encouraged to view it as a true goodbye. The character's death within the story itself only reinforced this sense of permanent closure. And yet, in a development that would have seemed almost unthinkable at the time of Logan's release, Jackman did eventually return to the role years later for an entirely different, much more comedic and irreverent film, reuniting with Ryan Reynolds and even with young co-star Daphne Keane, who also reprised her role as Laura. The character who had been given such a deliberately final, dignified, and emotionally devastating send-off in Logan would go on to appear again in a film built almost entirely around tonal whiplash, gleeful self-parody, and franchise inside jokes, creating a strange and almost comedic irony when viewed against the deeply serious nature of his original farewell. There is also irony in how the film's somber, melancholy vision of a near-future world with militarized borders and desperate refugees fleeing toward Canada in search of safety wound up feeling eerily connected to real-world political conversations that intensified shortly after the film's release, despite the fact that production had wrapped well before those particular debates reached their peak. Critics and analysts noted this resonance specifically because the filmmakers had not set out to make any direct political statement about immigration or border policy at all. Mangold's primary intention was simply to draw from classic Western mythology, where the open frontier and dangerous border crossings have always functioned as powerful storytelling devices. The unintended timeliness of those images, arriving in cinemas at a moment when border politics were becoming an unusually prominent part of public discourse, gave the film a layer of cultural resonance that neither the writers nor the studio had specifically engineered, turning what was meant as a piece of Western-inspired myth-making into something that felt accidentally, almost uncomfortably topical. Finally, there is a certain professional irony in how thoroughly the film succeeded by deliberately rejecting nearly everything that had defined its own genre's recent commercial success. At a moment when shared universe blockbusters filled with bright costumes, sprawling ensemble casts, and city-leveling final battles were dominating box offices around the world, Logan instead committed fully to a small, intimate, mostly three-character road trip story with a hard R rating, minimal CGI spectacle, and a tragic, unambiguous ending in which the hero permanently dies. By every conventional Hollywood logic of the time, this approach should have limited the film's commercial appeal. Instead, it became one of the most critically acclaimed and financially successful entries in the entire X-Men franchise, earning over $600 million worldwide and topping numerous critics' lists for greatest superhero performances in films of its decade, proving that audiences were not only willing to accept a smaller, sadder, more emotionally serious version of a Marvel blockbuster, but were actively hungry for exactly that kind of story, even as the wider industry continued, doubling down on the very formula Logan had so deliberately walked away from. If these ironic historical details about Logan gave you a deeper appreciation for everything happening behind the scenes of this story, be sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel for more in-depth breakdowns of your favorite movies, and leave a comment letting us know which of these ironic details surprised you the most. More detailed content covering your favorite films is on the way soon, so stay tuned. Cultural significance lies in how successfully it deals, further cementing his reputation as one of British comedy's most versatile and consistently inventive creative voices. Logan occupies a singular place in the history of superhero cinema, not simply because of what happens within its story, but because of everything it consciously refuses to be. Released worldwide on March 3, 2017, the film arrived at a moment when audiences had grown accustomed to a very particular formula for comic book blockbusters: bright primary colors, sprawling ensemble casts, city-leveling final battles, and a near-total absence of permanent consequence for its heroes. Director James Mangold, working from a screenplay he co-wrote with Scott Frank and Michael Green, built Logan as a direct rejection of nearly every one of those expectations. The result is a film that feels less like a superhero movie and more like a weathered, sun-bleached westerns smuggled into the body of a Marvel production, and it is precisely that tension between genre expectation and genre subversion that gives the film its enduring power. The story is set in the year 2029, a deliberately bleak vision of the near future in which the mutant population has been quietly and almost completely wiped out. No new mutants have been born in roughly a quarter century, a detail the film never fully explains, choosing instead to let the mystery hang over the story like a slow, creeping dread. The X-Men, once a celebrated and hopeful symbol of mutant unity and heroism, no longer exist in any organized form. The world has simply moved on without them, and the absence of that institution is felt in every frame of the film's opening act. Logan himself, the man the world once knew as Wolverine, has been reduced to something almost unrecognizable from the character audiences had followed for nearly 2 decades across the franchise. His healing factor, the very ability that once made him functionally immortal and endlessly resilient in battle, has begun to fail catastrophically. Worse still, the adamantium metal bonded to his skeleton decades earlier during brutal government experimentation is now slowly poisoning him from within, a cruel and ironic twist in which the very thing that once made him indestructible has become the silent architect of his decline. He survives by working as a limousine driver shuttling wealthy clients across the dusty stretches of land near the Mexican border, numbing his physical agony and psychological exhaustion with alcohol, his body bearing visible scars and slow-healing wounds that would have vanished instantly in earlier chapters of his story. Logan is not alone in his hidden, crumbling existence. He shares a secret refuge, a collapsed industrial structure near the border, with Caliban, a mutant whose tracking abilities make him useful for locating other mutants, and with Charles Xavier, the once brilliant telepathic founder and moral center of the X-Men. Charles, now elderly and afflicted with a degenerative neurological disease, represents perhaps the film's most quietly devastating tragedy. His mind, once a tool of extraordinary precision and benevolent power, has become dangerously unstable, prone to seizures that unleash catastrophic psychic shockwaves capable of injuring or even killing anyone nearby. Logan and Caliban keep him sedated through carefully managed medication, isolating him from the world not to punish him, but to protect everyone, including himself, from the very mind that once made him one of the most powerful beings on the planet. The image of Charles Xavier, the philosophical heart of the X-Men's dream of peaceful coexistence, now reduced to a frightened, medicated old man hidden away in a rusted water tank, sets the emotional tone for everything that follows. This is not a story about heroes triumphing. It is a story about heroes enduring, fading, and eventually being asked to give everything they have left for one final purpose. That purpose arrives in the form of Laura, a young girl whose sudden appearance shatters the fragile equilibrium of Logan's hidden life. A desperate nurse named Gabriella approaches Logan, pleading with him to transport Laura north to a place called Eden, a rumored sanctuary for escaped young mutants near the Canadian border. Logan initially refuses, hardened by decades of loss and disappointment, accepting payment from Gabriella simply to keep his silence rather than to help. But when Gabriella is murdered and Logan discovers that Laura has secretly stowed away in his vehicle, he is forced to confront the truth of who she really is. Laura was created inside a secretive transigen facility, a biotech corporation that had been harvesting preserved genetic material from old-world mutants to manufacture an entirely new generation of engineered mutant children. Laura's genetic template came directly from Logan himself, making her, in every meaningful sense, his biological daughter, infused with the same accelerated healing factor and retractable bone claws that defined his own existence for decades. The revelation reframes the entire film, transforming what begins as a reluctant rescue mission into something far more personal, a story about a broken, dying man being confronted with an unexpected legacy he never asked for and is not sure he is capable of protecting. What follows is one of the most emotionally textured road movies hidden inside a superhero framework that mainstream cinema had ever attempted. Logan, Charles, and Laura set out across the American heartland, pursued relentlessly by Donald Pierce, a cybernetically enhanced mercenary leading a private security force called the Reavers, hired by Transigen to recapture Laura and silence any witnesses to the program's existence. Behind Pierce stands the colder, more calculating Dr. Xander Rice, the scientist overseeing Transigen's experiments, whose motivations are sharpened by a deeply personal vendetta against Logan tied to events from his own family's past. As the trio moves further from the relative safety of the border, the film deliberately slows its pace, choosing to linger on small, human moments rather than rushing toward the next action sequence. Logan resists forming any emotional attachment to Laura, exhausted by a lifetime of loss and unwilling to risk caring for someone he expects to lose as well. Charles, despite his deteriorating condition, sees in Laura something Logan cannot yet allow himself to see, a flicker of hope, proof that the future he had spent his life fighting for might still be possible. Their journey is punctuated by danger and tragedy. A tense confrontation at a casino hotel results in a brutal battle with the Reavers, during which one of Charles's psychic episodes accidentally immobilizes innocent bystanders, a stark reminder that even his good intentions now carry catastrophic risk. Amid the chaos and exhaustion of the chase, the film offers its audience one brief, precious moment of stillness when the group accepts shelter with a kind farming family, the Munsons, who welcome them with warmth and generosity neither Logan nor Charles has experienced in years. For a short while, the film allows its three central characters to simply exist together as something resembling a family, sharing a meal, exchanging quiet conversation, and experiencing a version of domestic peace that has been denied to all of them for most of their lives. It is one of the gentlest sequences in the entire film, and Mangold uses it deliberately to deepen the emotional stakes before everything is taken away again. That peace is destroyed with devastating cruelty when the Reavers track the group to the farm, this time accompanied by a horrifying new threat, X-24, a younger, more savage clone of Logan himself, manufactured by Transigen using his own preserved genetic material from years earlier, before his healing powers began to fail. X-24 possesses all of Logan's old strength and speed, but none of his conscience, memory, or capacity for love, making him a perfect, remorseless killing machine. In the resulting massacre, members of the Munson family are killed, and most devastatingly, Charles Xavier himself is murdered, smothered in his bed while Logan is occupied fighting elsewhere on the property. The loss of Charles represents the emotional turning point of the entire film, stripping away the one steady source of wisdom, warmth, and moral guidance Logan had left in his life, and forcing him into the final stretch of his journey utterly alone except for Laura. Grief-stricken and pushed to his physical and emotional limits, Logan and Laura press on toward the Canadian border, eventually discovering that Eden is, in fact, real, hidden deep within a forest and home to a small group of other escaped Transigen children, each possessing unique mutant abilities of their own. For a brief moment, it appears Logan has succeeded in delivering Laura to safety. But Transigen's forces, led by Rice and Pierce, locate the children's hiding place, intent on eliminating every trace of the program's failures rather than allowing the truth to become public. The film's climactic battle in the forest becomes Logan's final stand, a desperate, physically punishing fight against Pierce's mercenaries and, ultimately, against X-24 himself. Severely weakened by the accumulated injuries and the ongoing internal poisoning from his own adamantium skeleton, Logan is pushed to the absolute edge of his strength, and it is only with Laura's help, using a rare adamantium bullet capable of permanently killing a healer, that the younger, soulless version of himself is finally destroyed. The fight, however, costs Logan his life. In one of the most quietly devastating endings in modern blockbuster cinema, Logan dies beneath a tree in the forest clearing, with Laura at his side. In her final moment with him, Laura, who had remained almost entirely silent throughout the film, finally speaks, calling him Daddy. A single word that crystallizes the unintended but deeply real father-daughter bond the two had formed over their journey together. The surviving children bury Logan in the forest, and as they prepare to cross safely into Canada, Laura turns Logan's makeshift wooden grave marker onto its side, transforming the cross into an X, a quiet and deeply symbolic tribute honoring him as the final true member of the X-Men. The film closes not on triumph, but on a somber, hopeful note, suggesting that although Logan's painful story has ended, the future he sacrificed himself to protect may yet continue through the next generation of mutants he helped set free. What makes Logan so distinct within its genre extends well beyond its plot. The film carries a hard R rating, a rarity for mainstream superhero cinema, which allowed Mangold and his collaborators to explore violence, language, and emotional darkness with a level of honesty almost never permitted in comic book films. This decision was made possible in part by the earlier commercial success of Deadpool, which proved that R-rated superhero content could still achieve massive box office success, giving 20th Century Fox the confidence to commit fully to this darker, more mature vision rather than softening it for a broader audience. Stylistically, the film draws heavily from classic American westerns, most explicitly the 1953 film Shane, whose themes of an aging gunfighter pulled into one final act of violence to protect a family are woven directly into Logan's narrative structure and even referenced on screen when Charles and Laura watched the film together. Additional influences from road movies like Paper Moon and character studies like Unforgiven and The Wrestler give the film its distinctive, grounded, dust-covered visual identity, favoring sun-bleached cinematography and naturalistic staging over the glossy spectacle typically associated with the genre. Produced on a comparatively modest budget of around $97 million, far lower than most major superhero films of its era, Logan became both a critical and commercial triumph, ultimately earning over $600 million worldwide, more than 6 times its original budget. Critics praised the film almost universally for its raw emotional weight, its willingness to subvert genre conventions, and its decision to treat its characters not as invincible icons but as exhausted, mortal human beings nearing the end of their journey. Hugh Jackman's performance, delivered as his definitive farewell to a role he had played for 17 years, is widely regarded as the finest of his career in the part, while Sir Patrick Stewart brought devastating vulnerability to a version of Charles Xavier far removed from the composed authority audiences had known in earlier films. Breakout newcomer Daphne Keane, in her first major film role, delivered a performance built almost entirely on raw physicality rather than dialogue, earning widespread acclaim and launching her into a string of significant roles in the years that followed. Ultimately, Logan endures as one of the defining films of its genre not because it embraces the conventions that built superhero cinema into a global commercial juggernaut, but because it deliberately walks away from nearly all of them. It is a story about aging, loss, legacy, and the quiet, painful work of learning to care for someone again after a lifetime of loss has taught a person to expect nothing but more loss. It treats its central hero not as an eternal, untouchable icon, but as a man finally allowed to grow old, suffer, and die with dignity and purpose, surrounded by the fragile, unexpected family he never thought he would find. That willingness to let its hero be mortal, vulnerable, and ultimately human is precisely what elevates Logan beyond the boundaries of its genre, transforming it into one of the most genuinely moving and critically respected films to ever carry the Marvel name. demonstrated that superhero cinema could be reshaped around the conventions of an entirely different, older genre without losing its core identity, proving that stories about extraordinary, larger-than-life characters could still feel intimate, mortal, and deeply human when filtered through the right cinematic lens.